A billionaire saw a homeless girl sleeping at his company door. What he did next, no one expected. For a man who'd built an empire on cold calculation, compassion wasn't in the business plan. But something stopped him that night. One split-second decision would shatter everything. What happened next shocked his executives, threatened his empire, and revealed the painful truth he'd been hiding. No one could have predicted the price of redemption, or how high he would be willing to pay. Maxwell Harrington's reflection glared back at him from his 50th floor office window, the city lights below forming a glittering carpet beneath the empire he'd built. Another 18-hour day had crawled by. Another billion-dollar deal secured with ruthless efficiency. Another night where success felt strangely hollow, despite the congratulatory messages flooding his inbox. He straightened his custom Italian tie and grabbed his briefcase, handcrafted leather that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The cleaning staff had long since departed. Even his executive assistant had given up waiting hours ago. Maxwell preferred it this way. Alone with the empire he'd constructed, brick by unforgiving brick. The elevator descended in silence as he checked the stock prices one last time on his phone. His company had just crossed the $500 billion valuation mark, a milestone that made headlines across every financial publication worldwide. The board was ecstatic. His investors were practically giddy. Maxwell barely noticed. Success had become as routine as breathing. The lobby's marble floors echoed beneath his polished shoes as he strode toward the exit, mind already mapping out tomorrow's acquisitions. But as he pushed through the revolving doors into the cool night air, something disrupted his perfectly ordered world. A small figure huddled in the doorway of his gleaming skyscraper, wrapped in a tattered jacket despite the summer heat, a backpack clutched protectively against her chest. Security will handle this, he thought automatically, reaching for his phone with practiced indifference. Homelessness was unfortunate, but not his problem to solve. His charitable foundation wrote checks for that sort of thing. But when the girl looked up, 17, maybe 18 years old, with dirt-smudged cheeks and tangled hair, her eyes stopped him cold. They weren't pleading or desperate. They were defiant, calculating, familiar in a way that sent an uncomfortable chill down his spine. "You can't stay here," he heard himself say, his voice lacking its usual command. The security guard at the door shifted, waiting for the nod that would authorize removal. Maxwell had given that nod countless times before without a second thought. "I know," the girl replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "Just until morning. Then I'll disappear." Something in her tone, resignation wrapped in determination, made Maxwell hesitate. Images flashed through his mind. Board meetings where he'd ruthlessly cut community programs to boost quarterly profits, neighborhoods demolished for his developments, families displaced for progress. But the words that followed shocked even him, as if someone else had temporarily hijacked his voice. "I have a guest apartment in the building, just for tonight." The security guard's jaw dropped slightly. The girl's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "No strings," Maxwell added, unsure why he felt compelled to clarify. "Just a place to sleep. You'll be gone tomorrow." She stood slowly, clutching her backpack like a shield. "Why would you help me?" It was a question Maxwell couldn't answer. Not to her, not to himself. But as he led her back through the lobby toward the private elevator, ignoring the stunned expressions of the night staff, he felt a strange unraveling begin within him. What Maxwell didn't realize was that this split-second decision, this momentary deviation from 20 years of calculated self-interest, would shatter the empire he'd spent his life building. By morning, Nothing would ever be the same again. The private elevator ascended in uncomfortable silence, the subtle hum of machinery filling the space between them. Maxwell stood with his back perfectly straight, Italian leather shoes planted firmly on polished marble, eyes fixed on the illuminated floor numbers that tracked their journey upward. The girl huddled in the opposite corner, her tattered sneakers leaving faint smudges on the immaculate floor. Her wary gaze never left him, calculating, assessing, like a cornered animal preparing for either flight or attack. The soft ping announcing each passing floor seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space, marking the seconds of their strange, unexpected journey together. "I'm not giving you my name," she finally said, breaking the tension with words that carried both defiance and fear. Her fingers tightened around the frayed strap of her backpack. Maxwell glanced at her, noting the defensive posture, the calculated distance she maintained between them, the way her shoulders hunched slightly forward as if preparing to absorb a blow. Her hair, which might have been blonde beneath the grime, hung in tangled curtains around a face too thin for someone her age. "I didn't ask for it," he replied evenly, "and I don't need your charity." The statement came out rehearsed, a mantra perhaps, something she told herself through countless cold nights and empty days. "Good, because I'm not offering any." The words came out harsher than intended, the default corporate coldness he'd cultivated over decades of boardroom battles. Maxwell caught himself, surprised by his own reflexive cruelty. He softened his tone, an unfamiliar adjustment. "It's just a place to sleep. One night. Nothing more." The elevator doors opened with a soft whisper to reveal a minimalist hallway, adorned with subtle recessed lighting and a single abstract painting worth more than most people's homes. The corridor led to his private floor, the crown of the Harrington Tower, a space few were privileged to access. The guest apartment sat directly opposite his penthouse, a spacious suite he maintained for visiting executives, potential investors, or the occasional family member he felt obligated to entertain during holidays. It had housed senators, celebrities, and foreign dignitaries. It had never housed anyone like her. Kitchen's fully stocked. Bathroom has everything you need, towels, toiletries, whatever. Maxwell gestured vaguely as they approached the door. "There's a security panel by the entrance. Don't touch it unless you're using the code." He punched in a temporary sequence, the keypad glowing blue beneath his manicured fingers. "This will let you in and out until noon tomorrow. After that, it deactivates automatically." The door swung open silently, revealing the apartment beyond, a study in understated luxury with its cream-colored furnishings, tasteful artwork, and expansive layout. The girl stepped hesitantly across the threshold, her eyes widening at the floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing the glittering cityscape 30 stories below. For a moment, her hardened exterior cracked, revealing something childlike beneath. A flash of wonder, perhaps even awe, at a world she'd only seen from the outside. "Bedrooms through there," Maxwell continued, pointing toward a hallway. "Clean clothes in the dresser. They won't fit, but they're better than—" He gestured at her filthy jacket and torn jeans, stopping short of completing the insult. She ran her fingers along the back of an Italian leather sofa, leaving a faint smudge that made Maxwell wince internally. His cleaning staff would have their work cut out for them tomorrow. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked again, suspicion returning to narrow her eyes. "Nobody does something for nothing, especially not someone like you." Maxwell hesitated, caught off guard by the directness of her question. The truth was, he didn't know. Something about her eyes, perhaps. That combination of defiance and desperation that reminded him of someone. Or maybe it was the board meeting earlier that day, where they dispassionately discussed demolishing a homeless shelter to make way for luxury condominiums. Necessary casualties of progress, his development director had called the 200 displaced residents. The timing of finding this girl at his doorstep felt like some cosmic joke, a karmic reckoning personified. "Get some rest," he said instead, retreating toward the door, unwilling or unable to examine his own uncharacteristic impulse. "I'll have security escort you out tomorrow. Don't get comfortable." The girl nodded once, her face unreadable. "I never do." But as Maxwell crossed the hall to his own penthouse, the soft click of his door lock engaging behind him, his phone buzzed with a news alert. He froze in the marble entryway, staring at the headline that illuminated the screen. Harrington, Industries under federal investigation for fraud and tax evasion. His heart hammered against his ribs, the familiar comfort of his luxurious surroundings suddenly feeling like a beautifully appointed cage. Impossible. He'd been careful, meticulous. The offshore accounts were structured through layers of shell companies, the transactions fragmented across multiple jurisdictions, untraceable. Unless... The realization hit him like a physical blow, forcing him to steady himself against the wall. Jenkins. His CFO had threatened to go public last week after their heated argument about the shelter demolition. "There's a line, Max," Jenkins had said, his normally deferential tone replaced with disgust. "Even for us, there has to be a line somewhere." Maxwell had called his bluff, certain that 20 years of complicity and a golden retirement package would keep him in line. He glanced back at the guest apartment door across the hall, paranoia suddenly gripping him like a vice. What if this wasn't coincidence? What if the girl wasn't just some homeless teenager who happened to choose his building's doorway? What if she was connected to Jenkins, or worse, the feds? A plant, perhaps, someone sent to gain access to his private floor, to search for evidence, to catch him off guard. Maxwell pulled out his phone to call security, his thumb hovering over the contact, then hesitated. He had no evidence, just fear. And something else. A strange, unfamiliar feeling that had been growing in his chest since he'd made the impulsive decision to help her. Guilt, conscience. These were foreign concepts in the cutthroat world he'd dominated for decades. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Maxwell Harrington was questioning himself. And as he entered his empty penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless, he wondered if everything he'd built, his company, his reputation, his very identity, was about to come crashing down around him. He poured himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old scotch, the amber liquid catching the city lights as he moved to the window. Somewhere in the darkness, beyond the glass, federal agents were probably gathering evidence, preparing warrants, readying themselves to dismantle his life's work piece by piece. And just across the hall, separated by nothing more than 2 doors and a corridor, the girl was harboring secrets of her own. Secrets that would prove far more dangerous than any federal investigation. Secrets that were, though Maxwell couldn't possibly know it yet, inextricably linked to his own carefully hidden past. Maxwell couldn't sleep. The news alert had triggered a cascade of emergency protocols, midnight calls to his legal team, encrypted messages to offshore accounts, and carefully worded instructions to his most trusted lieutenants. By 3 a.m., he stood at his penthouse window, tumbler of untouched scotch warming in his hand, watching the city that had once been his playground now transform into a potential prison. The glittering skyline that had always represented his conquest now seemed to mock him with its indifference to his predicament. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, still imposing in his tailored pajamas, silver hair perfectly in place despite the hour. But his eyes betrayed the first hints of something unfamiliar. Fear. Not the calculated risk assessment he'd mastered in decades of corporate warfare, but something more primitive. The kind of fear that comes when control slips away. Across the hall, separated by 40 feet of premium hardwood flooring and 2 reinforced security doors, the girl wasn't sleeping either. Cassandra, though she hadn't shared this name with Maxwell, sat cross-legged on the luxurious bed, the Egyptian cotton sheets pushed aside, her backpack open beside her. The contents were sparse, but carefully curated. A worn photograph with creased edges and coffee stains, a small leather-bound notebook filled with cryptic entries and newspaper clippings, a switchblade with a pearl handle, and a nondescript black USB drive. She twirled the drive between her fingers, contemplating her next move in the silent opulence of the guest suite. The bathroom still smelled of the expensive soap she'd used to scrub 17 days of street grime from her skin. Her hair, now clean and revealing its natural honey blonde color, hung damp around her shoulders. She'd refused to wear the clothes in the dresser. Accepting shelter was one thing, but wearing his charity was another line she wouldn't cross. Her own clothes lay drying over the shower rod, still tattered, but at least somewhat cleaner. 6 months of tracking, of sleeping in shelters and alleyways, of following paper trails and whispered rumors had led her to Harrington Tower. To him, the man who had no idea who she really was, or what she knew about the empire he'd built on secrets and betrayal. "You look just like her," Cassandra whispered to herself, comparing Maxwell's features in a Forbes magazine cover she'd torn out to the faded photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes and a hopeful smile. The resemblance was unmistakable, genetic markers impossible to deny. The same steel-gray eyes, the same proud jawline, the same calculating intelligence that seemed to evaluate everything as an asset or liability. Her mother's last words echoed in her mind, spoken through cracked lips in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and despair. "Find him. Make him pay for what he did to us." The memory brought the familiar surge of anger, a current of rage that had sustained her through the worst moments of the past 6 months. Through hunger and cold, through the leering gazes of men who saw her youth as something to exploit, through the crushing loneliness of her quest. She slipped the USB drive back into her backpack, carefully tucking the photograph beside it. Tomorrow would require perfect timing. Tomorrow, everything would change, for both of them. Morning arrived with harsh clarity, sunlight slicing through Maxwell's bedroom windows, despite the automated shades he'd forgotten to activate in his distracted state. He rose mechanically, following the routine that had served him for decades. He showered under precisely calibrated water pressure, dressed in his armor of custom tailoring, selecting a particularly imposing charcoal suit with subtle crimson pinstripes, his battle uniform for crisis days, and consumed his standard breakfast of black coffee and protein shake prepared by his private chef. No hint of the night's turmoil showed on his face as he reviewed contingency plans on his secure tablet. The federal investigation was concerning, but not insurmountable. He'd weathered storms before, had built his empire by anticipating threats and neutralizing them before they could materialize. This was just another problem to solve, another opponent to outmaneuver. When his private elevator opened onto the hallway of his executive floor, he was surprised to find the girl waiting, dressed in the same clothes, cleaner now, but still bearing the unmistakable signs of street life. Her backpack was clutched to her chest like a shield, but her posture had changed. She stood straighter, more confident, as if the night in luxury accommodations had restored something essential. "I thought you'd be gone by now," he said, checking his Patek Philippe watch with deliberate casualness. "You said noon." Her voice was steady, almost challenging. "It's only 8. Maxwell studied her with newfound wariness. Something about her demeanor had changed overnight. The defensive caution remained, but there was something else now. A focused intensity that made him uneasy. In the harsh morning light, he noticed details he'd missed in the dim lobby. The shape of her cheekbones, the set of her jaw, the calculating assessment in her eyes that seemed oddly familiar. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Harrington." He raised an eyebrow, his hand instinctively moving toward the panic button disguised as a tie clip on his lapel. "So, you do know who I am. Everyone knows who you are." She stepped closer, seemingly unafraid despite the obvious power imbalance between them. "Your face is on magazine covers, business school textbooks, and charity gala programs. But I know things about you that nobody else does. Things even you might have forgotten, or chosen to forget." A chill ran through him, entirely separate from his concerns about the federal investigation. This wasn't the desperate gratitude he'd expected from his impulsive act of charity, nor was it the simple opportunism of someone trying to leverage an unexpected connection to wealth. This was something more calculated, more personal. "Is this blackmail?" he asked, voice deliberately even, mind already calculating the cost of making this problem disappear. "This is opportunity." She held his gaze with unsettling confidence. For someone so young, so seemingly vulnerable, you need someone who can move unnoticed. Someone who can access places and people your security team can't approach without raising alarms. Someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Someone invisible to the systems that are closing in around you. And why would I need that? Maxwell kept his expression neutral, though his mind raced. How much did she know about his situation? Was this connected to the investigation, or merely opportunistic timing? "Because your world is about to collapse, and I'm offering you a way out." She nodded toward his phone, which he realized he was gripping with unusual tension. The news alert last night was just the beginning. There's more coming, much more. Maxwell studied her with growing unease. This strange girl who had appeared at precisely the moment his carefully constructed life began to fracture. Coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely with each passing second. Either she was connected to his enemies, or she was something else entirely. Something he hadn't anticipated. "Who are you?" he asked finally, the question emerging more vulnerable than he'd intended. Her smile was cold, calculating, familiar in a way that disturbed him deeply. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected not his present self, but a younger version. Hungry, ruthless, willing to do whatever it took to win. "Someone from your past. Someone you should have never forgotten." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with another alert, the vibration seeming to travel up his arm and into his chest with ominous significance. The screen illuminated with words that confirmed his worst fears. "Federal agents raid Harrington Industries headquarters. CEO Maxwell Harrington named as primary target in massive fraud investigation." Time was running out. His carefully constructed contingency plans now seemed woefully inadequate in the face of such an aggressive move by federal authorities. Whatever game this girl was playing, whatever her true motives, Maxwell recognized the desperation in his own position. Sometimes survival required unlikely alliances. Sometimes the devil you don't know is preferable to the devils already at your door. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked, already knowing he was stepping onto dangerous ground, already calculating how to use this strange girl for his benefit before discarding her when convenient. "A partnership," she replied, extending her hand. small, with bitten nails, but steady and determined. I help you escape whatever's coming, and you give me what I really want. Which is? Maxwell didn't take her hand yet, suspicion warring with desperate pragmatism. Her eyes, so familiar, so haunting, hardened with resolve, all pretense of vulnerability vanishing in an instant. Justice. The word hung between them, loaded with implications Maxwell couldn't fully decipher. But time was a luxury he no longer possessed. His empire was under siege, his carefully constructed walls crumbling around him. And here, improbably, stood someone offering a way through the flames. As Maxwell reluctantly shook her hand, accepting whatever Faustian bargain she was offering, neither of them noticed the dark sedan pulling up to the building below, nor the federal agent stepping out with warrants bearing both their names. Neither saw the second team positioning themselves at the service entrance, nor the digital specialists already dismantling Harrington Industries' firewall floor by floor. The chess pieces were in motion. The game had begun. And as the morning sun cast long shadows across the luxury apartment hallway, two unlikely allies sealed a pact that would unravel decades of secrets and lies. A pact that would either save them both or destroy them together. They're already here, Maxwell said, his voice dropping to a controlled whisper as his eyes darted to the security panel on the wall, where a small red light had begun to pulse rhythmically. The silent alarm, triggered only when unauthorized personnel entered his private elevator shaft or bypassed the biometric scanners on the executive floor. His shoulders tensed beneath the expensive fabric of his suit, but his movements remained fluid. Practiced, the physical manifestation of crisis management honed through decades of corporate warfare and personal caution. He moved with surprising agility for a man his age, striding purposefully to a seemingly ordinary section of wall, adorned with an abstract painting worth more than most people's annual salaries. Without hesitation, he pressed his palm against a specific portion of the frame, and the painting slid silently upward, revealing a sleek touch screen embedded in the wall behind it. The hidden panel illuminated with a soft blue glow, displaying a complex security interface. "What are you doing?" Cassandra asked, tension evident in her voice as she clutched her backpack tighter against her chest, eyes darting between Maxwell and the hallway leading to the elevator. The casual observer might have mistaken her vigilance for fear, but there was calculation in her gaze, the instinctive situational awareness of someone accustomed to danger and quick escapes. "Buying us time." His fingers flew across the screen with practiced precision, inputting complex security overrides and authorization codes. The interface responded to his touch, screens changing rapidly as systems throughout the building came under his command. Every floor of this building has emergency protocols, redundant systems designed to protect assets and information in case of various scenarios. I'm activating a controlled evacuation protocol, fire suppressant malfunction in multiple zones. It'll seal off certain areas, open others, redirect security personnel, create enough chaos to mask our movements. Cassandra watched him work, noting the practiced precision of his movements, the absence of hesitation or confusion. This wasn't improvisation born of desperation. This was a contingency plan he'd prepared long ago, perhaps rehearsed mentally countless times. "You've been expecting this," she observed, the realization bringing a mixture of respect and wariness. Maxwell's mouth tightened, a brief flicker of something. Regret? Resignation? Crossing his features before disappearing behind his carefully maintained facade of control. "I've been expecting something. In my position, you don't survive without preparation." The screen flashed green, confirming his commands had been accepted, and distant alarms began to wail throughout the building. The sophisticated sound system that normally piped subtle ambient music through the corridors now broadcast evacuation instructions in a calm, authoritative voice. We have approximately 7 minutes before they override the system or realize it's a false alarm. 7 minutes to disappear, Cassandra murmured, a hint of professional appreciation in her tone. Good thing I'm an expert at that. She moved toward the elevator, but Maxwell caught her arm, his grip firm but not painful. The touch of someone used to being obeyed, yet careful not to show aggression. Not that way. They'll have it covered. Standard procedure is to secure all primary entry and exit points first. He released her arm and moved with purpose to a bookshelf against the far wall. An elegant built-in feature that showcased leather-bound first editions and rare art objects. With practiced ease, he pulled a specific volume. Machiavelli's The Prince, she noted with ironic appreciation. And the entire shelf swung outward with barely a sound, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Service corridor. Leads to the maintenance elevator and emergency stairwell. It's not on the building's main grid or security schematics. Cassandra couldn't hide her surprise, eyebrows lifting as she reassessed both the man and the situation. A secret passage? Really? I thought those were just in movies and billionaire conspiracy theories. Despite her sarcastic tone, she was already moving toward the opening, recognizing its strategic value. Paranoia has served me well over the years, Maxwell replied with grim humor, gesturing for her to enter first, though apparently not well enough. The self-deprecating admission seemed to cost him something, a crack in the armor of a man unaccustomed to acknowledging failure. The passage was dimly lit by recessed emergency lighting along the floor, barely wide enough for Maxwell's broad shoulders. The walls were unfinished concrete, a stark contrast to the luxury of the spaces they had just left, the utilitarian skeleton beneath the building's opulent skin. They moved quickly, the sounds of the building's chaos muffled by the thick walls. Alarms, voices, the distant thud of security doors engaging and releasing, according to Maxwell's programmed protocol. "Why are you helping me?" Maxwell asked as they descended a narrow staircase, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "What's your real angle? You could have simply disappeared with whatever information you have, sold it to the highest bidder, or handed it to the feds for immunity." Cassandra glanced back at him, her expression unreadable in the low light, shadows accentuating the angles of her face. Angles that carried echoes of his own features, though neither acknowledged this similarity aloud. "I told you. Justice. Justice is subjective, nebulous." Maxwell's voice carried the practiced neutrality of a man accustomed to negotiations where revealing too much emotion was a tactical error. One person's justice is another's vengeance. The line between them is thinner than most people care to admit. In this case, they're the same thing. She paused at a junction where the narrow corridor split in 3 directions, listening intently, head tilted slightly, as she filtered the building's ambient sounds. Her posture reminded Maxwell of a wild animal sensing danger, alert, ready to move in any direction necessary for survival. "You really don't recognize me, do you? Not even a flicker of recognition? That's almost impressive." Before Maxwell could respond, the distant sound of heavy boots on metal stairs echoed through the passage. Multiple sets, moving with the coordinated efficiency of tactical training. They were no longer alone in the hidden infrastructure of Harrington Tower. "This way," Maxwell hissed, pulling her down the rightmost corridor with unexpected urgency. "There's a maintenance exit that leads directly to the parking garage. Level P3. reserved for executive vehicles and building services. They emerged into the cavernous underground garage, the air thick with concrete dust, exhaust fumes, and the lingering scent of industrial cleaners. The space was eerily empty. Most employees hadn't arrived for the workday yet, and the evacuation protocol had likely prevented the usual morning arrivals. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete, despite their efforts to move quietly, the sound bouncing off low ceilings and support pillars. Maxwell led her not toward the executive section with its Tesla charging stations and reserved spaces, but to a distant corner where service vehicles and contractors typically parked. He approached a nondescript dark gray sedan, not the luxury vehicle she might have expected from someone of his status, but an unremarkable mid-range model that would attract no attention on city streets. Registered to a shell company 3 corporate layers removed from anything connected to me, he explained, unlocking it with a key card rather than a key fob that could be tracked or deactivated remotely. Purchased with cash through an intermediary, untraceable to Harrington Industries or any of my known associates. There was no pride in his voice, merely the factual tone of someone explaining a long-established contingency. As they slid into the car, the interior surprisingly modest, with cloth, seats rather than leather, and a basic entertainment system. Cassandra finally opened her backpack, movements deliberate as she extracted the worn photograph she'd carried for so long. The image was creased from frequent handling, its colors slightly faded, but the woman's face remained clear. Young, beautiful, with eyes that seemed to hold both hope and sadness in equal measure. She placed it deliberately on the dashboard as Maxwell started the engine. "Look at it," she commanded, her voice taking on an edge that hadn't been present before. "Really look at her face." Maxwell's eyes flicked to the photograph out of instinct, a cursory glance that transformed into a transfixed stare. The color drained from his face in stages, like tide receding from shore, leaving behind the pale landscape of shock and recognition. His hands froze on the steering wheel, the engine idling as his carefully constructed world tilted on its axis, foundations crumbling beneath the weight of a past he'd thought safely buried. "Elizabeth," he whispered, the name clearly painful to speak aloud, as though the mere utterance of it caused physical discomfort. The single word carried a universe of history, of emotions long suppressed. "My mother," Cassandra confirmed, her voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath the surface. Anger, grief, and something else. Something almost like triumph at finally witnessing the recognition in his eyes. "The woman you abandoned 20 years ago when she told you she was pregnant with your child. The woman who died alone in a county hospital last year, still waiting for you to acknowledge her existence. To acknowledge mine." Maxwell stared at the photograph, at the face that had haunted his dreams for decades, despite his best efforts to excise her from his memory. His expression shifted through a complex series of emotions: shock, disbelief, grief, and finally, a dawning horror. "I never knew," he said finally, his voice hollow, stripped of its usual authority and precision. "I never knew she was pregnant. She disappeared. After our last argument, she just vanished. I thought..." "You thought what? That she just evaporated because it was convenient for your narrative?" Cassandra's careful control began to crack, years of rehearsed confrontations spilling out in real time. "She protected you, kept your secret when it could have destroyed your precious reputation and tanked your company's IPO. She raised me alone, working 2 jobs, sometimes 3, while you built your empire on the backs of people like us. People you discarded when they became inconvenient." The wail of sirens penetrated the thick concrete walls of the garage, growing closer, multiple vehicles, approaching from different directions. The federal response was escalating, closing in on the building with coordinated precision. "We don't have time for this now," Maxwell said, his voice regaining some of its authoritative edge as he shifted the car into drive, pragmatism temporarily overriding emotional turmoil. "But I swear to you, there's more to this story than you know, than either of us knows." "Then you'll have plenty of time to explain," Cassandra replied, settling back into her seat as the garage door opened before them, responding to the security clearance embedded in the vehicle's transponder. Her posture was deliberately casual, but her eyes remained vigilant, scanning for threats. "Because I'm not letting you out of my sight until I get the whole truth. Every last detail of what happened between you and my mother. Every choice you made that shaped both our lives." As they accelerated up the ramp toward daylight, toward the uncertain landscape of life as fugitives, neither of them noticed the small tracking device already blinking steadily beneath the car's chassis. The sophisticated device had been placed there not by federal agents pursuing the financial crimes case, but by someone else entirely. Someone with resources, patience, and intimate knowledge of Maxwell's contingency plans. Someone who had been watching them both for much longer than either realized. Someone who had their own definition of justice to fulfill, their own agenda that had been decades in the making. A third player in a game that Cassandra and Maxwell didn't even know they were part of. The sedan merged seamlessly into morning traffic, becoming just another vehicle in the urban flow, carrying its passengers toward a collision course with secrets neither was fully prepared to face. Behind them, Harrington Tower, the physical manifestation of Maxwell's empire, grew smaller in the rearview mirror, its gleaming facade now surrounded by the flashing lights of law enforcement vehicles. An era had ended. The countdown to revelation had begun. The city passed in a blur of steel and glass as Maxwell navigated the morning traffic with practiced precision. The sedan moved smoothly through the growing congestion, neither too fast to attract attention nor too slow to suggest hesitation. His hands remained steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through his system, the physical manifestation of decades spent making high-stakes decisions under pressure. Beside him, Cassandra sat in watchful silence, her posture deceptively relaxed, while her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, cataloging escape routes and potential threats with the instinctive vigilance of someone accustomed to living on society's margins. Neither spoke for the first 20 minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Maxwell calculating escape routes and contingencies, mentally reviewing safe houses and emergency protocols established years ago for scenarios he had hoped would never materialize. Cassandra watching his profile with years of questions burning behind her eyes, studying the man whose blood ran through her veins but whose existence had shaped her life primarily through absence. The morning sun cast harsh light through the windshield, illuminating the subtle signs of stress on Maxwell's face, tightness around his eyes, the occasional muscle twitch in his jaw. His expensive watch caught the light as he adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, the luxury timepiece now incongruous with their situation as fugitives. "Where are we going?" she finally asked as they crossed the river on the Morrison Bridge, leaving downtown's distinctive skyline behind. Her voice was carefully neutral, betraying neither the anxiety nor the simmering anger that churned beneath her composed exterior. "Somewhere they won't look immediately." Maxwell checked the rearview mirror for the third time in a minute, his gaze methodically tracking vehicles that had been behind them for more than a few turns. "I have a property, not connected to my name or any known aliases. Not even my most trusted financial advisors know about it." "Of course you do." Cassandra's tone was dry, almost sardonic. "Let me guess. Paid for in cash through another shell company, maintained by people who think they're working for someone else entirely?" Maxwell's lips tightened almost imperceptibly, the only visible reaction to her accurate assessment of his methods. Not everything I've built was for greed or ego. Some of it was for survival. The words carried a weight that suggested layers of meaning beyond their immediate conversation. Survival, she repeated, testing the word as though examining an unfamiliar concept. Interesting choice for a man who's spent 2 decades in penthouses with private security, private jets, and enough wealth to insulate yourself from virtually any consequence. You don't know what I've been running from. The statement hung between them, neither question nor explanation. A door cracked open to a past more complex than the narrative Cassandra had constructed. Enlighten me. Her challenge was direct, reminiscent of his own conversational style in boardrooms and negotiations, direct, unembellished, cutting straight to the core. Maxwell took an abrupt turn down a side street, then another, executing a textbook surveillance detection route that seemed second nature to him. The neighborhoods gradually changed character, upscale commercial districts giving way to residential areas, then transitioning to increasingly industrial zones with fewer witnesses and cameras. Not yet. First, we need to make sure we're not being followed. His eyes continued their vigilant scan of mirrors and sightlines. The people coming after us have resources that make federal law enforcement look amateur by comparison. They'll have access to traffic cameras, satellite imagery, cell tower data. We need to create gaps in their surveillance capabilities. They drove in silence through increasingly dilapidated industrial areas, the urban decay providing its own form of camouflage. Abandoned warehouses with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls loomed on either side of potholed streets. Maxwell navigated with surprising familiarity, suggesting this wasn't his first journey through this forgotten corner of the city. Eventually, he pulled into what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse district, cutting down an alley barely wide enough for the sedan and parking behind a derelict building that had once housed a manufacturing operation of some kind. He cut the engine, the sudden silence accentuating the isolation of their location. We switch vehicles here, he explained, opening his door and scanning the surroundings with practiced efficiency. There's a maintenance shed around back with a replacement. It's been there for years, maintained quarterly by a service company that thinks it belongs to a private security firm. Cassandra followed him cautiously, backpack clutched to her chest like a shield, her footsteps deliberately placed to minimize noise on the gravel-strewn concrete. You've prepared for this very specifically, she observed, eyes narrowing slightly. This isn't just general paranoia. This is a protocol for this exact scenario. I prepare for everything, Maxwell replied without a hint of apology or defensiveness. Contingency planning isn't paranoia when the threats are real. He led her to a rusted metal shed that looked like it hadn't been opened in years, its exterior deliberately neglected to discourage curiosity. Yet the padlock yielded easily to his key, revealing a pristine black SUV inside, covered with a tarp that he efficiently removed and folded with military precision. This one's truly untraceable. No electronics beyond the basic engine management system, pre-2010 model. Can't be hacked or tracked remotely. No GPS, no satellite radio, no built-in cellular connectivity. The vehicle was unremarkable by design, a model common enough to blend into any environment, but not so common as to stand out in higher-end neighborhoods. The license plates, she noted, were from a neighboring state, adding another layer of misdirection. As they transferred to the new vehicle, Cassandra noticed Maxwell pausing by the sedan they'd arrived in, kneeling to examine its undercarriage with focused intensity. His body tensed as he reached beneath the chassis and carefully removed something. "What's that?" she asked sharply, instantly alert to the change in his demeanor. He held up a small electronic device between his thumb and forefinger. Sleek, matte black, approximately the size of a domino, but thinner. His expression darkened as he examined it. Tracker. Not one of mine. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Someone had anticipated his movements, perhaps even his contingency plans. The feds? Cassandra asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected otherwise. No. He crushed the device under his heel with deliberate force, grinding it into unrecognizable components. This is military grade. Black budget stuff. Passive transmission system with encrypted signal bursts to avoid detection. His eyes scanned the horizon with newfound wariness, reassessing their situation with this new information. This isn't standard law enforcement. This is something else entirely. Something connected to what my mother discovered? Cassandra pressed, making the connection that had been forming since their conversation in the penthouse. Maxwell didn't answer directly, instead opening the SUV's door with renewed urgency. We need to move. Now. If they planted one tracker, they might have placed others. We can't assume this location is still secure. 20 minutes later, after another series of evasive driving maneuvers through industrial zones and residential back streets, they arrived at their destination. A modest two-story house in a middle-class neighborhood, its beige siding and neatly trimmed hedges designed to blend seamlessly with surrounding homes. It was unremarkable in every way, except for its meticulous maintenance and strategic positioning at the end of a cul-de-sac, with clear sight lines in all directions and multiple potential escape routes. Maxwell used a standard key rather than an electronic fob to enter, another deliberate choice to minimize digital footprints. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished but functional. Clean lines, neutral colors, and minimal decorative elements. It had the impersonal quality of a high-end extended-stay hotel suite, designed for utility rather than comfort or self-expression. A safe house in the truest sense, revealing nothing about its owner or purpose. Maxwell immediately moved to a panel hidden behind a bookshelf that contained actual printed books, classics and bestsellers that would appear normal to any casual observer. He entered a complex code into the concealed keypad, checking security systems and surveillance feeds that appeared on a monitor embedded in the wall. We should be secure for now, he said finally, the tension in his shoulders easing marginally as he removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie. Small concessions to the stress of the morning and their changed circumstances. Satellite uplink is active. Security perimeter is clear. System shows no unauthorized access attempts in the past 6 months. How long have you had this place? Cassandra asked, taking in the impersonal space that showed no signs of regular habitation despite its immaculate condition. She set her backpack down but kept it within arm's reach, not yet ready to fully relax her vigilance. 15 years. Maxwell moved to the kitchen, opening cabinets stocked with non-perishable supplies, everything from basic staples to high-end emergency rations with extended shelf lives. Purchased through a series of offshore transactions, maintained through a property management company that thinks it belongs to a reclusive author who uses it occasionally for writing retreats. Cassandra set her backpack on the counter, finally extracting not just the photograph, but a thin file folder that had been carefully protected in a waterproof sleeve. 15 years, she repeated, a new intensity in her voice. Right around the time you were securing the Thompson merger, the deal that tripled your company's value overnight and established Harrington Industries as a global player. Maxwell froze, his back to her as he reached for glasses in an upper cabinet. The momentary stillness revealed more than any verbal response could have. You've done your research, he said finally, his voice carefully modulated to reveal nothing. My mother did, Cassandra opened the folder, revealing newspaper clippings, financial records, and handwritten notes in a precise, elegant script. She arranged them methodically on the granite countertop, creating a timeline of events. She kept track of everything. Every acquisition, every stock split, every profile piece calling you a visionary and self-made man. Every charity gala you attended, every woman you were photographed with. Why? Maxwell turned, his expression guarded as he set 2 glasses of water on the counter, maintaining a careful distance between them. At first, I think she was hoping you'd come back, that you'd realize what you'd thrown away. Cassandra's voice remained steady, but her fingers trembled slightly as she arranged the documents on the counter, the only visible sign of the emotional current running beneath her composed exterior. Later, it became something else, a record of injustice, evidence. Evidence of what exactly? Maxwell's question was quiet, his eyes now fixed on the documents rather than on her face. That's what I've spent 6 months trying to figure out. She pointed to specific notations in her mother's handwriting, dates circled in red ink, connections drawn between seemingly unrelated events. She was tracking patterns, connections, things that didn't make sense unless you knew what to look for. The night before she died, she told me there was something bigger than just you abandoning us. Something she discovered about your company, about what really happened during that merger. Maxwell's face had gone pale again, the carefully maintained facade of control slipping to reveal genuine alarm. Your mother was mistaken. The words lacked conviction, sounding hollow even to his own ears. Was she? Because the federal investigation seems focused on financial irregularities dating back to exactly that period. Cassandra fixed him with an unwavering stare, her posture shifting subtly into confrontation. What really happened with Thompson Technologies? What did my mother discover that was worth silencing her for? Silencing her? Maxwell's shock seemed genuine, his eyes widening as he processed her implication. What are you talking about? My mother didn't die of natural causes, Cassandra said, her composure finally cracking as emotion bled into her voice, grief and rage intertwining. She was healthy, active, 46 years old with no medical history of concern. Then suddenly, mysterious organ, failure, no explanation the doctors could find. She pulled out a final document from the folder, a toxicology report with several compounds highlighted in yellow marker. Except for this, traces of substances that shouldn't have been there. Substances that aren't included in standard toxicology screens. Maxwell took the report with visibly shaking hands, his expression shifting from disbelief to horror as he read the technical language and chemical compounds listed. This is impossible. I would never. For the first time since she'd confronted him, he seemed completely stripped of his carefully constructed control, genuine emotion breaking through. Then who would? Cassandra demanded, leaning forward, her voice intensifying. Who else knew what she knew? Who else had reason to silence her? Who else would benefit from making sure whatever she discovered stayed buried? Before Maxwell could answer, a security monitor embedded in the kitchen wall beeped softly. A subtle alert designed not to startle, but to command immediate attention. He moved quickly to the panel, his personal shock temporarily subsumed by immediate tactical concerns. Vehicle approaching, he said tersely, eyes fixed on the surveillance feed that showed multiple angles of the surrounding neighborhood. Black sedan, tinted windows, no visible license plate. Not police or federal, they wouldn't be this obvious. They watched in tense silence as the car slowed near the house, then continued past without stopping. A reconnaissance pass, rather than an immediate approach. Could be coincidence, Cassandra said. But her body language had shifted to high alert, weight balanced on the balls of her feet, ready to move in any direction necessary. The street-honed instincts of survival overriding any desire for continued confrontation. In my experience, there's no such thing. Maxwell moved to a cabinet that appeared to contain ordinary household supplies, entering another code on a hidden keypad to reveal a small arsenal of weapons concealed behind a false panel. He selected a handgun, checking it with practiced efficiency that spoke of regular training rather than casual familiarity. We can't stay here. They're closing the net faster than I anticipated. Who is they? Cassandra pressed, watching him prepare with a mixture of wariness and reluctant respect for his methodical competence. You know more than you're saying. You recognize something in that toxicology report. Maxwell seemed to reach a decision, his shoulders squaring as he turned to face her fully. The calculation in his eyes gave way to something else, a weight of responsibility, perhaps even regret. Your mother was right. There was something buried in the Thompson merger, something that could destroy not just me, but people much more powerful than I've ever been. People who've spent 2 decades ensuring that information never comes to light. What information? Cassandra's voice had dropped to a near whisper, the magnitude of his admission settling over her. The kind that gets people killed. He reached into an interior pocket of his discarded suit jacket, extracting a small flash drive secured in a protective metal case. Everything I know is on this. Names, dates, account numbers, communications. The complete picture that I've been piecing together for years. If anything happens to me, get this to a journalist named Rebecca Chen at the Global Investigative Alliance. No one else. She's the only one with enough protection and resources to handle what's on here. Cassandra took the drive, studying it and then him with new uncertainty, her worldview shifting as she reassessed the man she'd spent years hating. Why are you giving me this now? Because you deserve the truth about your mother. About me. His expression softened slightly, humanity breaking through the armor of the corporate titan. And because I'm not convinced we're both getting out of this alive. He paused, his gaze lingering on her face with a new awareness. You have her eyes, you know. Your mother's. I should have seen it immediately. Before Cassandra could respond, all the lights in the house went out simultaneously, plunging them into sudden darkness. Emergency backup power kicked in seconds later, bathing them in dim red light as alarms began to sound from the security panel. Not loud klaxons, but a series of soft, urgent tones designed to alert, without revealing the house's security capabilities to outsiders. Perimeter breach, Maxwell said grimly, moving to the window with his weapon raised, staying carefully to the side of the frame to avoid presenting a silhouette. Multiple directions. They've cut the main power and probably the communication lines. Outside, dark figures moved with military precision across the property, converging on the house from all sides, at least 6 operatives visible from their vantage point, dressed in nondescript tactical gear without identifying insignia or markings. Who are they? Cassandra whispered, instinctively moving away from the windows toward the center of the room, her hand closing protectively around the flash drive. The past, Maxwell replied, his voice heavy with resignation and determination. Coming due for collection. He turned to her, decision made, tactical priorities overriding any emotional considerations. There's a crawlspace access in the pantry, hidden panel behind the shelving unit. Leads to a tunnel that exits 2 blocks away in the basement of a foreclosed property. Take the drive and go. Now. I'm not leaving, Cassandra protested, a stubborn set to her jaw that mirrored his own. Not when I'm finally getting answers. Not when I'm finally understanding what my mother was trying to tell me. This isn't about just you and me anymore. Maxwell's tone left no room for argument, the voice of a man accustomed to command in crisis situations. If they get that drive, everything your mother died for disappears forever. All the evidence, all the connections, gone. I'll hold them off, buy you time. This is bigger than our personal history. Their eyes met in the red emergency lighting. Two strangers connected by blood and secrets, by a past neither fully understood and a future neither could predict. In that moment of shared danger, the resemblance between them was suddenly striking, the same determination, the same capacity for calculated risk, the same unflinching confrontation of reality. "Find Chen," Maxwell said more softly, positioning himself with a clear line of sight to the front entrance while maintaining cover. "Tell her Maxwell sent you. Tell her it's time to open the Prometheus file. She'll understand." The sound of breaking glass came from the rear of the house, followed by the soft pop of a tactical entry device. Not a full breach charge that would attract neighborhood attention, but a controlled entry technique used by professionals who prioritized stealth over speed. "Go," Maxwell urged, his attention now fully on the approaching threat, weapon steady in his hands. "Finish what your mother started. Find the truth for both of us." With one last look at the father she'd never known, the man who had shaped her existence through his absence, and now, perhaps, through this final act of protection, Cassandra clutched the flash drive and disappeared into the shadows of the house, carrying with her the weight of 2 decades of secrets and the key to a truth larger than either of them had imagined. As she slipped into the hidden passage, the sound of the first exchange of gunfire echoed behind her, the opening notes of a confrontation whose outcome she could not stay to witness. The tunnel stretched before her, dark and uncertain, much like the future that awaited at its end. But for the first time in years, she moved forward with more than just anger driving her steps. Now there was purpose, clarity, and the unsettling possibility that the man she'd spent her life hating might not be the villain of her story after all. The questions multiplied with each step she took away from the safe house. Who were these people? What had her mother really discovered? And perhaps most troubling of all, if Maxwell wasn't behind her mother's death, then who was? The answers lay somewhere in the flash drive clutched in her hand, and with a journalist she'd never met, connected to a file named for a titan who stole fire from the gods and suffered eternal punishment for his transgression. As the sounds of conflict faded behind her, Cassandra Harrington, accepting her father's name for the first time, if only in the privacy of her own thoughts, moved forward into darkness, guided by the red emergency lights that lined the tunnel at floor level. Behind her, Maxwell faced the consequences of decades of secrets. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and perhaps, finally, the truth. The hunt had begun. Rebecca Chen's apartment overlooked the river, 17 floors up in a renovated industrial building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city skyline. But the blinds were drawn tight, casting the space in artificial twilight despite the afternoon sun outside. The apartment was sparsely decorated but not minimalist. Rather, it had the lived-in functionality of someone who prioritized practicality over aesthetics. Bookshelves lined one wall, overflowing with reference materials and investigative journalism awards. A dedicated workspace dominated one corner, featuring 3 monitors, a high-end laptop, and various security devices that seemed out of place in a residential setting. Chen herself was not what Cassandra had expected. In her mid-40s, with streaks of premature gray in her black hair, she had the alert, measured presence of someone who had seen too much to be easily surprised. She wore simple black-framed glasses and casual clothes, jeans and a faded university sweatshirt, that contrasted with the intensity of her gaze as she examined the flash drive Cassandra had placed on the table between them. "You haven't looked at what's on it?" Chen asked, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had once been a heavy smoker. "No," Cassandra replied, her exhaustion evident after 36 hours of constant movement, using only cash, staying off main roads, and sleeping in 2-hour increments at roadside motels. "He said it was for you specifically, that you'd know what to do with the Prometheus file." Chen's posture changed subtly at the mention of the name. A slight stiffening of her shoulders, a new focus in her eyes. "Maxwell gave you this himself? In person?" "Yes." Cassandra hesitated, the memory of their parting still raw. "Right before they came for him." "And you're certain he was taken? Not killed?" "I heard the gunfire from the tunnel, but before I exited, I heard voices. They were searching for something. Someone said to secure the primary target. They wanted him alive." Cassandra's hands tightened around the mug of coffee Chen had provided. "At least initially." Chen nodded, processing this information with clinical detachment. "That tracks with their methodology. They'd want to interrogate him first, determine what he knows and who he's told." She picked up the flash drive, turning it over in her fingers with a mixture of reverence and apprehension. "Do you have any idea what's on here?" He said it contained evidence about the Thompson merger from 15 years ago, something that powerful people have been keeping buried. Cassandra leaned forward, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. "Something connected to my mother's death." "Your mother?" Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. "Elizabeth Harlow." Cassandra couldn't hide her surprise. "You knew her?" "Not personally, but her name appears in my research into Harrington Industries." Chen rose and moved to her workstation, inserting the flash drive into a standalone computer that wasn't connected to any network. "She worked as an administrative assistant in the legal department during the Thompson acquisition, correct?" "Yes. That's where she met Maxwell." Cassandra followed Chen to the computer, watching as multiple layers of encryption presented themselves on screen. "How do you know all this?" "I've been investigating Harrington Industries and the Thompson merger for nearly a decade." Chen's fingers moved rapidly over the keyboard, entering complex passwords. "It started as a financial story, irregularities in the acquisition that didn't make sense. But it kept expanding, touching defense contracts, offshore accounts, political influence. Every time I got close to publishing, sources would disappear, evidence would vanish, or I'd receive very convincing suggestions to pursue other stories. The final encryption barrier fell, revealing a meticulously organized file structure. Chen clicked on a folder labeled simply Prometheus. "My God," she whispered as the contents populated the screen. "He actually had it all. Every piece I've been missing." Cassandra stared at the monitor, trying to make sense of the documents, spreadsheets, and image files. "What is all this?" "Evidence of what really happened during that merger." Chen opened a document containing what appeared to be scanned handwritten notes. Thompson Technologies wasn't just a software company. They had a classified division developing advanced surveillance systems for the intelligence community. Systems that could bypass constitutional protections, access any digital device remotely, create undetectable backdoors in encryption. And Harrington acquired this technology? Cassandra asked, pieces beginning to connect in her mind. Not exactly. Chen opened another file, a series of emails with certain names redacted. A group within the government wanted this technology but couldn't legally develop it themselves due to congressional oversight. So they orchestrated the entire merger, using Harrington as the public face while they quietly took control of Thompson's classified research. My father was just a front? Cassandra struggled to reconcile this with the powerful figure she'd grown up hating. Initially, yes, but Maxwell wasn't as compliant as they expected. Chen pointed to another document, a memo with Harrington's distinctive signature. He discovered what they were really doing with the technology. Not just foreign surveillance, but domestic. Political opponents, journalists, activists, anyone they deemed problematic. And he objected? Cassandra couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. According to this, he threatened to expose the program. Chen scrolled through more documents. That's when they compromised him, offered him a choice: cooperation in exchange for wealth and protection or destruction. Not just financial ruin, but criminal charges, public disgrace. He chose cooperation, Cassandra said flatly. Yes, but he also began collecting evidence, insurance, he called it. Chen opened a video file, revealing Maxwell's face, looking years younger, but with the same intensity Cassandra had witnessed in the safe house. If you're seeing this, the recorded Maxwell said, then I've either acted on this information or I've been neutralized. Everything in this archive is authentic and verifiable. I've participated in illegal activities under duress, but that doesn't absolve me of responsibility. I make no excuses for my choices, only this attempt at atonement. Cassandra watched, transfixed, as her father detailed his involvement in what he called Project Prometheus, the classified surveillance program that had grown from Thompson's technology into something far more invasive and unaccountable. What does this have to do with my mother? She asked when the video ended. Chen hesitated, then opened another folder labeled Elizabeth. Inside was a collection of surveillance reports, photographs taken without her knowledge, and transcripts of recorded conversations. They were watching her, Chen said quietly. They knew she had access to sensitive documents through her position in legal. When she became pregnant and Maxwell ended the relationship, they saw it as a potential vulnerability, leverage they could use to ensure his continued cooperation. They monitored her for years, Cassandra realized, scanning the dates on the files. Even after I was born. Why? Because she knew something. Chen opened a final document, a memo dated just weeks before Elizabeth's death. According to this, she discovered financial transfers connecting Harrington Industries to black budget operations. She was piecing it together, just like Maxwell was, but from the outside. And they killed her for it. Cassandra's voice was hollow. The toxicology report you showed me matches compounds developed for covert operations, designed to mimic natural organ failure. Chen's clinical tone couldn't disguise the gravity of what she was revealing. They eliminated a potential threat. Cassandra stood abruptly, turning away from the screen as the full implications crashed over her. Everything she had believed about her life, about her father's abandonment, her mother's struggles, her own crusade for justice, was being rewritten in real time. All these years, she said finally, I thought he was the villain, that he discarded us for his ambition. The truth is rarely that simple. Chen closed the files and removed the drive. Maxwell made choices, compromises that cost him his soul piece by piece. But he also created this record, preserved this evidence, and he gave it to you when it mattered most. What do we do now? Cassandra asked, turning back to face the journalist. We publish, all of it. Chen's expression was resolute. Through secure channels, with multiple redundancies. Once it's in the public domain, they lose their power. They'll come after us. Undoubtedly. Chen didn't seem disturbed by this prospect. That's why I've already made arrangements. Secure location, trusted colleagues standing by. We release everything simultaneously through multiple platforms. And my father? Cassandra asked, the words still unfamiliar on her tongue. If he's alive, this will put him in even greater danger. Chen's honesty was unflinching. But it might also be his only chance. Once this is public, killing him becomes more complicated, raises too many questions. Cassandra moved to the window, pulling back the blind slightly to look at the city below. A city where, somewhere, her father might be fighting for his life, paying the price for decades of compromise and a final act of defiance. How soon can we release it? She asked, decision made. 24 hours to prepare the materials properly, verify key documents, redact information that could endanger innocent parties. Chen was already typing rapidly on her keyboard. I'll need to brief my team, activate our emergency protocols. I want to help, Cassandra said, turning back from the window with newfound resolve. I have a background in data analysis. I can help organize the evidence, identify connections. Chen studied her for a moment, then nodded. Your mother would be proud. She was trying to uncover this truth too, in her own way. And Maxwell? Cassandra couldn't quite bring herself to say, my father, again. He made terrible choices, Chen said carefully. But in the end, he chose to risk everything to expose the truth. That counts for something. As they began the painstaking work of preparing the files for release, Cassandra found herself in the unfamiliar position of hoping that the man she'd spent her life hating would survive long enough for her to tell him that she understood. Not just what he'd done, but why. Outside, the sun began to set over the city, casting long shadows across the river. Somewhere in those shadows, powerful forces were moving, unaware that their carefully guarded secrets were hours away from exposure. The countdown to revelation had begun, and there would be no stopping what was to come. The Prometheus file was about to bring fire to the world once again, illuminating dark corners where the powerful had operated unseen for too long. And like the Titan of myth, those who had stolen and misused its power would face their own form of eternal punishment, the unforgiving judgment of history.